This tutorial is for an infinity scarf, and the fabric that I'm using is a velour. Think of it as a stretch velvet. The stretch fabrics come 58 inches wide, which is plenty wide enough for what we need. And so then you only need to purchase 5/8 of a yard of the fabric, which will give you 22.5 inches, which is plenty enough for the scarf that we're going to make today. For this project, we're going to make a very easy infinity scarf, and this is just some leftover velour that I have. It's a stretch fabric, which comes 58, 60 inches wide, which is perfect. It's the right amount of width that I need. So if you're doing this and you're going to use these measurements, make sure you have a stretchy fabric. If you have a woven fabric, you would need to cut it a little wider. So for this, I already have it folded in half. So my fabric is 25 inches across, which, because it's folded, would be 50 inches. So fold it in half. This is 25 inches across, and then I'll just cut it 20 inches in length so that when I fold it, I have a scarf that's roughly 10 inches wide. So I'll go ahead and try to match this up. The knit fabrics tend to curl up on the edges a bit, so I'll just straighten it out as best I can. And I'm going to fold it to the 10 inches. Okay, I have my fabric straightened out, matched up my edges. I'm gonna fold it in half so that I have a 10-inch fold. And I have a cutting board here. I can just count 10 squares and that would be my 10 inches, or I have my ruler here that I can use. So if I start here, I'll just find a square. So 10 inches, and it's a rough estimate. I'm not gonna be exact. I'll probably cut it a little bigger on the 11 just because there's a line there. Okay, and I'll put my pin magnets here just to kind of weight it down for me. For this particular project, I'm going to use my rotary cutter. If you don't have a rotary cutter, no big deal. Just use your scissors. So I'll hold that in place for me. Move this to some. So my 11, or my straight line, is going to be about right here. So I'll use this as my straight edge and just cut along that. And I'm pressing kind of hard because I know my blade is dull. I need to get a new blade. Okay, and I would just pull it apart. And the mat that I'm using is called a self-healing mat, meaning that you can cut on it, you can stick pins in it, and it won't penetrate it. Basically, it heals itself. You don't mark it up by cutting on it. So you wouldn't want to do this on your table because you would cut your table. Okay, now that we have our piece cut in half, so when you open it up, you should have a piece of fabric that is 20 inches in height and 50 inches in width. And so from here, you just fold it in half, put yourself a couple pins in it. All you're doing is creating a tube. You're taking that rectangle, you're gonna fold it in half and sew along the straight edge of that. Simple as can be. And because this is a knit fabric, I will probably sew it with a zigzag stitch. You can always switch out your bobbin thread to a stretch thread, but I'm not doing that. I will just switch my needles, I will just switch my stitch to a zigzag stitch because the zigzag stitch will give it a little bit more give and help it to stretch better. So just finish pinning this all the way along the straight edge. So just unroll the edges and match them up and pin it as best as you can. And then I'm gonna start at one end and I'm gonna sew all along this long end here. The other side of it is folded, so you don't worry about that. You just sew along this straight edge. Okay, I'll switch my machine to a zigzag stitch. And I'm trying to do sort of a looser zigzag stitch. If it's too tight, it's not gonna work on this knit. It will just get stuck and it'll frustrate you. So I'm gonna test this one out and see if I like this stitch. that looks fine to me. Okay. Okay, so just sew straight down and unrolling it as you go to try to get your edges even. Then with knit also, if you pull it a little bit, that helps it get through the machine, and it helps so that it doesn't, you know, the knit doesn't get stuck in one place. This is a real easy project for beginners. It's an easy project. The kids love doing it because it's quick, because kids always want to finish quickly. That's one thing I love about sewing, is it helps them to learn patience. Okay, all the way to the end. Okay, from here, you just want to turn it to the right side. Just put your hand in. Okay. And just sort of lay it out and make sure you have it all straight and it's not, you know, you don't sew it together twisted. Have it laid out, and you're going to take your seams that you just sewed and match up your seams. So match those up first. Then what you're going to do is come and stitch it around as much as you can. Just stitch as far as you can go. Then the opening that's left, we can just do sort of a whip stitch by hand. So I will actually sew it some more, but as you can see, it's going to end up looking like this with my pins in place. This will be the part that I stitch, and make sure you stitch the seams so that you have those lined up. And then I'll end up with an opening about this much, but I'll probably stitch it a little bit more. You just stitch around as much as you can. Okay, I have it pinned with my right sides together, and I will maneuver it to get it into my machine here. And just stitch around. I want to make sure I'm matching up my seams here. Just stretch it a little bit if you need to. And you just stitch around as far as you can go. Okay, that looks good before it starts to get sort of bunched up and so forth. Okay, then when you open it up, you're going to have one side that looks like this. You're going to see the seam that you stitched on the sewing machine, and then you have this opening here that we can stitch closed by hand. Okay, I'll attempt to thread my needle. Let's see. Got that done. Yay! Okay. Then I'll pull it and stagger my thread so that I'm actually stitching with one strand of thread instead of two. So I'll stagger it, and I don't need a lot. We only have a little bit to sew closed. Okay. Okay, and I just want to turn my ends inward so that I see no raw edges. And I'll put myself a pin here, but I'm doing very light stitches. You want to make sure you're not sewing all of this together. Then I'll start stitching. Put my needle to the inside so that my knot that I just made is in the inside. So stick it inside the seam here. And then just do yourself a little stitch to close up the opening. So what I'm doing is just grabbing like a few strands, just a tiny bit of the fabric from one side, and then go to the other side. Like I said, you just want to make sure you don't go all the way through, because then you'd end up sewing the whole thing together. So I'm just going through the top layer here. Now we're at the end. We've closed up the opening. Grab my thread here. So you just want to make yourself a knot at the end. So what I do is just go back into my seam, take a few of the threads, a little bit of the fabric, and just put my needle through there to create a knot for me. Missed it. Okay, here we go. And see how it just knots up? I won't worry about that. I'll just trim all that when I'm done. Just keep going. So I usually do that about 3 times. And then just trim the extra, and we are done. Quick and easy.